Not quite live yet. There you go.
Good morning to all business leaders and those interested in discussing pressing boardroom dynamics and management issues. Those of you tuning in from the US, Europe, and the Middle East and Africa, I will moderate and frankly also participate in the elephant in the room discussion today. My name is Jacco Erasmus, CEO of N2Growth in the EMEA region. You will notice EMEA with a double A at the end. The last A actually stands for Africa, where we have an amazing regional office situated in the heart of Johannesburg, where I used to live in South Africa, the financial capital, where I think some of the brightest minds in the executive search industry works under the leadership of Sandra Burmeister, our regional president. I'm beaming in from Rotterdam, and the local time is 5 o'clock. So let me start by saying that I have picked a theme which fits very well, I think, in the discussion group, as it is complex, difficult to grasp in its totality, but something that is going, I think, to have a major impact on small, medium, and large business operations in the near future. And that's namely the evolving of operating models. So allow me to just make a distinction between operating models and business models for the sake of the conversation. Business models refer to the way a company is creating value. And Mike, as you might know, I'm a Porsche enthusiast. Porsche build superior quality cars where the car is far more valuable than the raw material that they create. So they create value. That's their business model. But that's not what we're going to talk about, or maybe later on in the discussion. I want to talk about operating models and how that is changing. Operating models describe the way a business structure its processes. For instance, to keep on using the example of Porsche, they might outsource manufacturing some parts to third parties. Example, the ignitions or the alternators to Bosch. It might have financial services center in Eastern Europe. It might have global supply chain organization somewhere else. I don't know. It's just an example. So we are going to talk about operating models, namely people, processes, systems, the way companies organize themselves to operate efficiently. Now the context is, and now the fun is starting. The context is that I think we might be seeing some interesting changes in company operating models and how these models are being shaped by various factors, and usually external factors like new technology, geopolitical changes, unforeseen crises like COVID-19. We talked about that a lot. And I guess that you guys are also seeing this happening on a daily basis. So this is what I would like to do, is zoom in a little bit and talk about how you see the way companies are organizing and reinventing themselves at the moment. Which trends are you spotting, if I may throw this into the group?
I'm happy to dive in and take a crack at this, and then Rule set me straight here in a few seconds. But look, I think the issue is if your business model is static, if your operating model is static coming in to the current environment, if it was stressed or had trouble coming into it, the current market dynamics are just revealing the magnitude of the stress that you brought in to the change. So I think what most organizations are facing right now is trying to reinvent themselves and reinvent themselves at scale, right? I mean, I'm old enough to have seen just about every type of business model come and go, only to come again, name something different, right? So, I mean, and really there are probably 50 to 60 different types of operating models that we could dig into. But I think what's really interesting is when organizations ratchet up their agility and they use kind of a mashup of things, right? So kind of the old traditional hierarchical structures gone, and the big multinational companies that still operate in that environment are getting absolutely crushed right now. So you need to think open source, not proprietary, loose collaborative networks and ecosystems. I mean, the whole mindset needs to change. And so this is a really fun time, and we're seeing people that are changing well, and we're seeing people that are really struggling with the change. What do you guys think about that?
So I'm thinking in like 7 different directions. I feel like I can go in many different roads right now. But the part that's a little bit crazy and exciting at the same time is that the virus taking place, I think, sped up many of these changes.
Yeah.
And made many organizations have to think about stuff that they should have been thinking about probably 5 years ago now, and in a very, very immediate way. And I'm just thinking of even the concept of working remotely.
Yeah.
I know that's something that we had personally embraced for over a decade now. And now many, many, many organizations are making this the norms. And we're seeing this not just in small organizations. We're talking like places like Facebook, where everybody has the option of just not returning back to an office. So that will completely change their operational model. And it then creates a new dynamic for attracting and retaining talent. And I think that was the part of the discussion I wanted to like take it in first. It's like, how do you evolve in a way to captivate new talent or the right talent for your company, especially in this day and age?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. Jaco?
Yeah, no, Mike, please go. I just wanted to make the remark, a spot on, Ro. What I see is that agile working, it creates an efficient business environment. It gives employees the freedom and the flexibility to work in different areas, either of an office or remotely, as you mentioned, when and how they choose. It has less constraints, more flexibility. The focus is more on performance and quality, and less about where the tasks are undertaken. And this is certainly a big, big change in the people part of the operating model of companies. So I'm absolutely on your page. Mike, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the people that are going to struggle the most with this transition are not necessarily the people doing the work, but the people overseeing the production of the work. So, I think the trend for a long time has been to move towards self-leading teams, right? And to really distribute work down and across the enterprise, to push really complex things out to the edges so that everything doesn't have to bubble up to a leader or a leadership team to give a blessing, right? I think leaders have to now become more enablers, more collaborators, more of a coach and a mentor, but not necessarily a taskmaster. And I think, that's going to be a big change for a lot of folks. Big change.
But Mike, is this going to lead to a decline in management functions? As we know.
As we know them, right? I think some roles are just going to disappear, and they're going to be positions on the org chart a couple of years from now that aren't even on people's radar screen, right? So I think the whole structure of management is just going to change. It's going to have to, because organizations have been carrying so much bloat, right? So pick any industry. We were talking before this call. One of our competitors in our space has laid off nearly 40% of their entire workforce. And where did they lay off? They laid off their operating infrastructure, right? Yeah. The exact people that we've been talking about are gone. They're out on the street. And so you've got very senior leadership and big producers and the small support function and everything in between. That bloat is just gone.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I think one of the things that I also noted is that if we talk about this genre, that management consultants, I have for many years developed targeting operating models based on best practices. But I always had problems with that because most often a lot of these consultants have never worked in a real organization. They've never lied awake at night, never been approached by an employee that because of personal reasons. They've never been confronted with the reality on the ground. So they often develop operating models which doesn't really fit or work well in practice. So, and I know, Mike, that you are always advocating next practices instead of best practices. So I would love to hear, how you think next practices, how that thinking model could add value to companies instead of the old best practice model.
Yeah, I think, best practices are problematic. I mean, the minute you label something as a best practice, it's likely outdated. And consultants, they're dangerous, right? I mean, they like to sell silver bullet solutions to clients that want shiny new objects. And if they can bring in a best practice that's worked someplace else and say, hey, this has worked over here, install it here. This is best in class, best in breed, best practice. The minute they do that, they basically dampen innovation, dampen creativity. They push people into a very narrow lane, and it becomes process oriented, it becomes incremental. And I think next practices, what that does is it says, if somebody says, hey, Mike, this is a best practice, I'm going to look and see how I can innovate on that, around that, to make it a next practice. I don't want to copy somebody else. I want to create something that works in our environment and our ecosystem. And when you look at talent, when you look at organization, there's a real chance to innovate if you'll get out of your own way. And that's my guidance to any leaders watching this call today, is get out of your own way, involve your team, figure out where the waste is, figure out where the bloat is, figure out where the points of tension are, figure out where things are constrained, blow up the silos. I mean, these are all the things that are going to free people to do what you hired them to do to begin with, right? And that's the interesting thing. I don't know, thoughts on that, Shana? You've been pretty quiet.
Yeah, I've just been mulling over this because I'm taking, experiences that I've had in the past with really bureaucratic organizations and huge organizations that, we're trying to standardize processes across the country, to growth where we're super agile, very small, and like the complete polar opposite of that. And so kind of the thing that is coming to my mind when I listen to you about next practices is the need to drive leadership skills and communication skills down to the lowest level. Like it's not just something that needs to be really developed in a select few to then be able to like effectively lead the group. Everybody in the group needs to understand how to lead because they have to be able to lead themselves. And so I'm excited about that because I think what that does is it creates opportunities for people to grow in positions that maybe they wouldn't have, because now it's not just this is your job, these are the tasks that you do. It's like you get to show yourself as a leader and lead yourself through your own job while also being able to work with others and be more collaborative. So I think that like these changes, driving transparency, driving over communication are going to be really positive in the long run, even if it does mean that in the short term, there's going to be the need to like cut the bloat out, I guess. It just sounds really harsh, but I mean, I think the reality is that some people have gotten complacent in their positions, I guess, and not used to having to grow.
Something that comes to mind as I hear you say that, Shana, is we're going to enter a stage where being a utility player is going to become key.
Yeah.
And finding more generalists in many organizations is going to be the key to their success. I know 10, 15 years ago, if you were a specialist in one thing and one thing only, you were able to stick to your title and only focus on that. And I think that can potentially be holding many organizations back by the fact that, one, we're moving from a technological standpoint so quickly that if you have the mentality that I'm a specialist in one aspect of my field and I'm not open to thinking outside the box, you're going to be left behind very, very quickly, or you probably got left behind already and you're struggling to stay on. And I think sometimes we do have to just say it out loud and put it out there, because sometimes we ignore these type of things.
Yeah, it's almost like, I would say it becomes, being tech savvy, it becomes a commodity. You have to have it. to be able to keep up in a business community. I want to just mention a very, very good comment made by Brooke Meyer. Mike, as you talked about leadership, he talks about adaptive leaders and said the adaptive leader will be compelled to reimagine how they provide value, including the effectiveness of the current leadership style. I think that's a very, very good summary of what you've just mentioned.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to how much courage does a leadership team possess? Are they willing to look at everything that's been created as kind of open season for reinvention or reimagination, right? And a lot of times I walk into an organization and, this is kind of rule of thumb, a Kentucky windage, if you will, but you can walk into virtually any organization. And if you just kind of root around for a while and you ask people questions like, hey, I'm curious, I noticed you were doing X. Why do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just the way we've always done it, know, and then you drill down a little bit further and you say, hey, if it was up to you, how would you do this? If you weren't constrained by this rule or practice or process, could you do this more effectively? Could you generate more efficiency or, could you improve? Oh yeah. I do it like this. And every organization, I don't care which one it is, probably even ours. I mean, I'm looking for these things all the time, but you can walk into virtually any company and find 20 to 30% of their processes that are useless. Many of them just exist because they exist. Yeah. They don't add any value at all. So I think when leadership has the courage to look at themselves and the things that they've created and instituted as maybe being outdated, obsolete, a blocking mechanism, and they're willing to kind of revisit the sacred cows, if you will, that's where you unlock hidden value and that's where you grow. But it takes a leader that's willing to kind of look at themselves and say, hey, we used to do it like this, but we can't survive doing that anymore. I mean, I saw a segment on TV early this morning about a pizza shop, I think in New York City, that turned their coal-fired ovens into a way to manufacture PPE, right? So they're doing face shields, and so you want to talk about a pivot, right? But they're delivering face shields all over New York City right now to hospitals and first responders and, equipment that's desperately needed in the market. This was a pizza shop. So I mean, you have to be willing to look at everything and say, if I were going to start this business today, would I? And if I were, would I staff it this way? Would I support it this way? Would I go to market this way? I mean, you have to constantly think like that, constantly.
Well,
yeah, please go, Shana.
I was just going to ask, because that in and of itself, like reimagining the business or re-evaluating the current paradigm or whatever, is almost like a full-time gig where like you have to watch the business operate. And so I think, isn't that generally why that kind of thing is outsourced and not necessarily done by the leadership team?
That's a great question. I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here, but I think that's the problem. When you outsource the core, you've missed the big picture, right? So I see this all the time with companies. They'll bring in a strategy consulting firm. And if you talk to their chief strategy officer or their internal strategy team, the consultants are doing the majority of the heavy lifting. The consultants are doing the majority of the work. And what does that do? It stunts the leadership development growth of your internal talent. And you're handing over the core of your business to an external third party because they're validating things that have worked in other places. Or they're validating an idea of an internal stakeholder that needs a rubber stamp. But, I think the best people to create what's going on are the people that are living it every day. because they see every aspect of it. Now, I don't have a problem in bringing in an outside third party to take a look at things, but I'm not going to hand them the keys to the castle. And so many people do that. I mean, if you look at the spend that some businesses have for like a strategy consulting firm, I mean, they can spend, I don't know, $100 million a year with them, right? You look at a digital transformation agency that comes in and wants to transform their business and bring it into, the future. Well, after spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars and going through digital transformation 3.0, they've figured out that they can't continue to reinvent failures. They have to understand their business before they transform it.
Yeah.
You can't transform without understanding.
No, that's true. And I mean, that's kind of looking at the current business model.
Yeah.
Building a roadmap to where you want your business to be. That's basically your future target operating model. That's the way you want your organization to operate. If I may just pivot back to the operating model discussion, you've just mentioned the pizza company making these face masks.
Yeah.
Do you think that it makes sense at all these days to have even to talk about operating models, or having a point in the future? When I worked as management consultant, we used to have work with companies with a 5 to sometimes a 10-year roadmap of where they want to be. And these days, in some sectors, it's a 1-year roadmap is even stretching it. Mike, what would be your thoughts?
I'm going to pass this to Rue because he's got a big grin. He's got a big grin on his face.
Oh, Rue, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Rue.
Oh, could you guys hear me?
Yes,
yeah, we got you now.
Yeah.
No, I was laughing because as I hear that statement, I imagine a company having their Q4 meeting in December 2019, planning for this year.
Yeah.
And the plan was 3, 5, 10 years out. I think that in this day and age, I understand why you may want to have a vision or where you want to go, but having a plan that's 5 years long is illogical. It no longer makes sense. Technology is moving too quickly. People are changing too quickly. And I think that's another factor that's going to drive how companies change their operating models. Like, I'm thinking of this new generation of workers that are going to enter the workforce that have a very different dynamic, similar to the conversation we were having last week. We have like my generation and then Gen Z coming after us. They have a very different mentality as to what work is.
Yeah.
And also, I think politically, many organizations are shifting the way they operate because of what happened 2 weeks ago. So I think it's very hard to say that you can plan for 3 to 5 years. I don't think that's no longer.
I like what you say, Ro. Just to add to it, I think one of the other factors is, which is starting to have significant impact on let's call it operating models, is the introduction of new legislation. Now, I see the way, for instance, web-based companies such as Uber, the way that they organized, is facing a lot of pressure due to changes which remove some initial competitive advantages, for instance, their tax structures, and the fact that their drivers might be viewed, they are independent, but they are viewed as company workers. So this means they're having to start providing employee benefits, pension funds. So it's even legislation is, as governments also learn and trying to keep up with new technologies and new business models, starting to put pressure on the way companies are organized, and means that this pressure is making them to change more rapidly. So, I mean, we always talk about innovation and how innovation is changing how companies operate, but there's a lot of external factors these days that's just as rapidly making impact on current organization models.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rue hit the nail on the head. I mean, Mike Tyson has a quote out there, which I love, right? Everybody has a plan until I hit him in the face. I mean, things happen and you have to be able to adapt and change and shift. And you folks have been talking about it. You have to do that almost real time today. So you have to have a vision in mind for where you think the company needs to be 3 years out, and where you're trying to go with your organization, and with your product and service offering, and with your people. And you have to have that vision, but then you have to kind of reach out to the future and try and pull that closer to you and accelerate it, right? Because what you think is going to be valid 3 years from now probably won't be. So, you're working in real time. And I think, you hit it squarely on the head as well, Jaco, talking about innovation, right? Ideas are great things, but ideas in and of themselves are not innovation, right? Innovation is when you take something through the ideation phase to the creation phase to the go-to-market phase, and you actually monetize on it. That's innovation, right? Yeah. Externally, anyway, from a product perspective. Internally, from a process perspective, you have to go through that map as well, right? You have to actually think about something which you can then create, which you can then implement, and then you can execute it. So I think there's a life cycle here that we travel, but it's compressed today. And so if you're not reinventing your organization almost daily, and we're doing that around here, right? I mean, we thought we reimagined search 5 years ago, and every year we've been reimagining search and how the talent acquisition process should work and how we should engage with clients so that we can unlock value in their organization, right? It's not just, well, this is the way our industry has worked for the past 100 years. It's how does it need to work a couple of years out, and can we accelerate that and bring it right into the present and deliver that to our clients? And smart businesses, regardless of their industry, are thinking like that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say, you mentioned our company. I just challenged the EMEA team on Monday to kind of reimagine, reinvent the search process. So having a look at the way it worked in the past, it's fine, looking at tools and methodologies, but kind of start from new and draw the process as if it's the first time that anybody thinks about how would the perfect value add search process looks like. And it's going to be a very interesting exercise, and we're probably going to compare the outcomes of the two project groups and then merge it to come up with something really new and fascinating and challenging in our space.
But it's not just, I think what I struggle with and what I'm really challenged by and what keeps me awake at night is I don't just want to tweak this thing a little bit. I just don't want to, have a little feature creep and, a couple more bells and whistles. I want something that when a client looks at it, they go, where has this been? Why hasn't somebody done this before? You've got to think from the perspective of the end user, regardless of the business you're in. So, if you take a look at, I don't know, pick any business, right? Let's look at LinkedIn as an example. They've got models for consumers, they've got models for businesses. So they've got B2B and B2C, then they've got their advertising model. I mean, it's a multi-sided business model, right? If you look at any organization today, they're monetizing different channels much more effectively. It used to be direct and indirect. I mean, now, there's a multitude of channels, right? And if you don't understand that, you're not making the impact on the market that you need to have, right? I don't know. It's just an interesting time. It's a really interesting time.
As you mentioned that, it's funny, Jaco, and I'm going to hit on what your guys are going through at EMEA, because we just went through something similar. And something that I wanted to point out that I think is super important is bring the least expected person to the table when you're reimagining something.
Yeah.
Because even for us, I think that dynamic has been super interesting to see. Like when you have BD has one approach, marketing has a different approach, the delivery team has a different approach, and then somebody comes out of left field and just asks the most obvious question, and nobody else asked it, and it just stopped us all. So say like, why haven't we asked that question and try to solve for that? And I think this is a new dynamic to business also, because you typically had the same faces around the same table asking the same questions. Bring someone different, and sometimes just let them be a fly on the wall and give them the permission to chime in whatever question comes up, and you may be shocked by what comes out of their mouth, and it may be something that was like right in your face, but because you assumed everybody knows, nobody opens up their mouth and asks the question. I don't know. I think that was interesting for us. For me, it was fun as we went through that. It was a bit stressful, I'm not gonna lie, but it was exciting at the same time.
No, that's exactly the challenge is going through the same process. And what I actually did, Ro, so I can appreciate what you're saying is I've removed myself as the CEO of EMEA from that process, because I've been in the business for quite some time. And even though I think I understand, I think I also miss a lot of new opportunities. And just me being in that process is like I have the possibility to distort the outcome and to influence it. So I'm removed myself.
Confirmation bias.
And Gordon Berridge, and who is the UK president, and Vera Serova, the partner in France, is leading this project. And so we had the kickoff, and there was a lot of energy and enthusiasm, because it's fantastic to be. It's almost like children giving them a bunch of clay and say, create something. And this is really what we're trying to do: is create something out of nothing, and see what comes out of that.
Here's the thing that's interesting, for people kind of listening to this discussion about how we're kind of talking about some of our own internal things. Understand that we lead the industry in virtually every meaningful category of performance metric. I mean, we're at the top of our industry in terms of what we deliver to our clients. And the numbers back that up. That's not just me saying that anecdotally. And we're shredding the industry leading practices as we speak. I mean, we're taking the best performing organization in our sector and dismantling it to try and create something even better. We're not trying to protect that, right? We're not trying to put it behind a wall and hold it close and hope that it survives. We know it's not going to survive because we're going to destroy it. That's how you get better. And so I think these things are interesting. But Rue's point, in particular, I belong to, I'm a senior fellow at an organization called the Gordian Institute. And what that organization does is it basically has mixed tables. The founder of that organization, John Rogers, is a master at this. And John grew up in politics, and then he had a PR and a lobbying firm. And so he's been in the swamp most of his life, and he understands the value of perspective. And so what Gordian does is we go in and we try and solve intractable problems, right? Things that people haven't been able to solve. And how do we do that? We bring in Hollywood movie producers and actors and, gamers and people, from the CIA, we bring in really interesting people, and we sit down and we try and just tear something apart and put it back together in a better way, or take something that isn't working at all, that needs to work, and make it work. And so that's kind of what we're doing internally, but that's what most organizations don't have the courage to do, is let people in, let them look around, be willing to just say, help me with this, and I think that's what I do all the time around here, is I say, I'm stuck, help me with this, because there are a lot of really smart people that can take some weird idea and turn it into something absolutely brilliant if you give them the opportunity. It's fun.
Well, Mike, let me share a secret with you. I will never forget when we started to talk about building the business. Also in May, I think we started to talk in 2015, and something you said really triggered me. Because I looked at, from my perspective, and from a regional operation, executive search operation, to a company like Growth, almost in awe. Wow, fantastic, so agile, a boutique company, but fast moving in the market. And you made the comment, you said, I sometimes have the feeling that I want to break this company again and reconstruct it and make it even better. And I thought it was it's such a innovating way of thinking about not being satisfied with what you have, but being able to kind of deconstruct it to make it even better.
Yeah. Well, take a look. It's just, I don't know. I'm just innately curious, I think. I'm not that bright, but I'm very curious, and I like to explore. And so I surround myself with really bright people that can take kind of that curiosity and turn it into something interesting. But look at any organization out there. Take a look at, let's pick, an 800-pound gorilla, right? Let's look at Amazon. I mean, look at the picture of where Jeff Bezos started, in his little one office, one desk, trying to figure out how to make Amazon what he intended it to be way back then, and look at Amazon today. They're in every market. Yeah. And if they're not in a market, wait a week, they'll be there. I mean, there are no limits, no boundaries. I mean, because there's the willingness to explore. It's like, okay, online books, cool. I mean, but look at what Amazon has turned into. Look at what Microsoft has turned into. Now you can take a look at an organization like Apple, for instance. Very innovative early on, very interesting designs. I mean, really cool stuff. But how much innovation is actually going on at Apple today, right? Yeah. I mean, if you looked at where they were and where they are today, and you basically benchmark that against other really successful, rapidly growing companies of a similar size and scale, I would say that Apple has great products, but I don't think they're very innovative today.
No, I think they failed to innovate the last couple of years.
Yeah, we got to let Root talk about it because he's ex-Apple, so he probably has an opinion.
I don't know. I think the difference is, and this is one of the reasons why I respect Apple so much, that they don't focus on features until it's ready to go out to the market. And I think it takes a lot for a company to have things sort of potentially ready and still hold them back and say, I don't think the market is ready for this. I don't know. That's an interesting company. I think when you have a team that's dedicated to secrecy, that tells you a lot, but it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, but see, I just don't think you can survive going forward being dedicated to secrecy.
I agree.
I mean, I think that is a road to perdition, right? I mean, that's just going to lead you in the wrong direction. So I think, what's interesting. So let's talk about a really innovative company. I mean, we have our warts, we have our flaws, but we're always pushing and stretching and testing, right? And so what does that mean with respect to talent? Here's an interesting thing I was looking at the other day. We have refugees from, really great organizations that have chosen to be a part of us. Most of our competitors, we have people that have come our direction, right? All the major firms, people are kind of lining up at our door trying to, get in and be a part of us. None of our people have gone to our competitors. Not a single one. Now when our people leave, they may stay in the business, they may open up their own shop, they may go do something different, but they're not going to our competitors because they know that creativity and innovation and culture and teaming structure just isn't there and it's not attractive to them. So regardless of what business you're in, if you want to attract the best talent, create the right culture, create the right operating environment, create the ability for everybody to have a voice, and not just a voice, but a voice that's heard. And you're going to be a magnet for great talent. I mean, I wish we could grow faster than we are because we got really great people that want to be a part of us. And we I'm trying to figure out how to make all that work. Right. It's an interesting market out there.
Something I wanted to bring up earlier was like the idea, or I guess the warning that it does take a lot of time because we have been given an opportunity to like really dig into our business and tear it apart right now. But that was largely due to the pandemic happening,
True.
and so it's like you almost have to have enough time dedicated to innovating your business, almost as much time as doing your business, in my opinion, just based on what we're seeing right now. And so it's like, how do you balance that? How do you get the job done while also innovating the job or how you do it?
Yeah. Well, there's so many different ways to do it too, right? I mean, you can innovate. I saw a comment from Jacqueline talking about other industries, right? So like adjacent and non-adjacent spaces. And, how do you incorporate even competitors? Can you collaborate with competitors, to unlock a new market, right? And so, there's organic and inorganic. And, if we don't have a chief innovation officer here because I kind of view everybody as their own chief innovation officer. And I don't want to have one person that I designate as the idea maker. What I want to have is everybody
encourage everybody
this stuff, right?
Yeah. Shana, my wife used to say, "Never waste a good crisis." And I think that's she picked it from somebody else, I guess. But that's exactly what we did. I think at N2, the last couple of months is take the time to and use it very well. I would like to kind of throw in a question into the group. If we could imagine the future, and I know, Mike, this is something that you probably you would like to do. What would be if we could look into the crystal ball, what do you think would be or could be the major changes that we can expect to take place in the way that companies, if you compare it to the way that companies are organized today? How different might management and leadership, for instance, look like from what we know now? If you may just for a couple of moments look into your crystal ball. And actually, I want to ask the same question to Shana and Ro from your perspective, because this is what we do. We also try to reimagine the future, but we only have the here and the now to work with. You want to take a shot at it, Mike?
Yeah. So the here and the now, right? What is the present? It's your springboard to the future, right? And so in order to go from here to there, you have to be brutally honest about present state. I mean, you have to acknowledge the problems, the issues, the challenges in order to move forward. But I think we're seeing it right now, and I think what companies are experiencing. I mean, I've seen data sets that differ on this topic, but I know which data set I tend to believe, right? So I've seen reports that say 70% of employees are looking forward to going back to the office. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe it for a second. I think those reports have an axe to grind and an agenda to push. Now, when I look at the reports that say 70% of people don't want to go back to work, I believe that. And so, when you look at the future and you say, okay, I'm a $30 billion company or a $70 billion company, and I've got fixed physical assets all over the world. And I've seen this. I've walked into client organizations that have made huge investments in real estate, right? And every now and then I'll hit the wrong button on the elevator and I'll get off and I'll see a floor that's just empty. It's just full of cubes. And I ask somebody, I say, what's with all of this? Oh, this is just space that people can use when they come into the office. Yeah, maybe. So I think it's going to cause a massive restructuring of physical assets and infrastructure. And even if they're going to maintain those physical assets, they're probably going to shrink them. They're going to have to rework the office dynamics based on things, to make it safe and to make it, I guess, productive. But I'm just talking about one little angle on things, right? But I think what's going to change is people are going to be able to move very quickly between organizations, very easily. And we talked about this before, the low switching costs now for talent to migrate. Yeah. And so if you don't create something that really puts your team first, if you don't create something that really puts your workforce top of mind so that they can deliver the right experience to your clients, to your end users, you're going to lose your best talent to people that are going to do that. You're just going to cede opportunity to people that are more agile and more courageous. So the future of business is more of what we're seeing here. I don't think, technology is going to have a big impact on it, but really, I look at technology as just unlocking value for the brilliant people that we have, right? Technology isn't, they used to say
a commodity.
They used to say every business has got to be a technology business or they won't survive. I think every business has to be a people business that understands how to utilize technology or they won't survive. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. Ruth, Shana?
I have definitely my own perception on the future of business. I kind of want to go after Rue.
I'm probably aligned a lot with what Mike said.
She said,
I think from my end, the way that I view it is we're going to go into like some form of completely remote environment. And because I view it, even just looking at my generation and people coming after me, we're not setting roots. So we're more willing to picking up and leaving and going somewhere else. And if your organization enables that, you are likely to attract more talent. And I'm probably speaking a little bit selfishly here because I like to do that. Like 4 or 5 times a year, I'm not in my home state. I'm gone. And I love the flexibility of being able to do that. And I know more and more people want to be able to do that. And I know if we weren't closed down and everybody was forced to work from home, as it happened over the past 3 months, many people probably wouldn't have been doing it from home. They would have chose to be at the beach somewhere and still be able to work and produce and be more creative.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to lead to some form of not centralized network of people that you can tap in at any given time. But I think it may also create a unique dynamic for almost like freelance executives, if we want to call it that, where people are going to come in, be meant for a project 3-4 quarters, and then they're out. And I think that's going to become fairly normal, like sticking to a corporation 20-25 years. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case.
Before you dive in, Sheena, I want to just talk about that for a second because it's interesting, right? I'm not a big fan of contractors, right? There's a place for them, and there's some really talented people out there that do that. But we're building here organically with people that want to be a part of what we're creating, right? And I think if we just open the doors and we let the gig economy invade us, there'll be some benefit to that, but there'll also be, I don't know. I worry about continuity and consistency and clarity and alignment and communications and because it's too squishy, right? But I think there's a place from the rigid traditional institutional corporate environment to where we are. And there's probably, we could get a little squishier probably than we are, but we can't get so amorphous that into growth doesn't really exist, right? And so how do you give those benefits to people? And we're trying to do that, but we're going to have to do better, right? We're going to have to make it so that people really desire to be a part of this for all the right reasons, not just, I want to come in here and nail a 3-month contract and then move on. I think that's a lot of what's wrong with business today, but that's my 2 cents.
If I may just, Shana, before we give, because I think there's something big coming from your side.
Shana's loading up.
Yeah, she's loaded. I'm going to coin the term now globally virtual mobility. And Ro, you've just brought me onto this term because what you mentioned, I think from a company perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And I see that I think we've placed maybe 4 or 5. You call them freelance executives, we call them interim executives. In the past week at big corporations, and the idea is from a company perspective that you want to leverage on the knowledge and expertise of somebody and to do something specific, to help you quickly integrate a firm in an M&A situation, or quickly divest, or put a new product onto the market, or you just want to, you basically buy some knowledge and expertise. You basically buy time. So I think that there's definitely a place for these type of executives. But I also really understand Mike's position that if you want to build something substantial, you want to build it with real people, and you want to build a real organization, people who really invest their time and their energy and their commitment. Because on the flip side of the coin, what I also see is there's a very low level of commitment from freelance executives, from interim executives. They're in it for the short term, for the quick buck, and then they're out. And will we leverage that here? Absolutely, we've already done that here. But in a manageable fashion, right? It can't. So like what really excites me is I hope I live long enough to see Rua and Shayna and their peers running this company, right? And now will you guys be here, or will you want to do that? Who knows? But that's where this will get really interesting, right? It is when those next generations are really carrying this thing forward, and we might even be in a totally different business by then. We're really good at what we do, but we could be really good at a lot of things because we've got the right talent. So a lot of this is driven by market dynamics and atmospherics, right? Where, we need to figure out where the market's going and beat, other competitors to that place. And that's the challenge, right? That's the challenge. So, I agree. Shayna?
Yeah.
Shayna, we're waiting.
Mike and Jaco actually made some really good points that I feel reinforces what I believe, which is I think a shift in ownership. I think that businesses are going to have to be more open to employee ownership. I think that cooperatives and that form of business, or that model of operating, is going to become more prevalent, because as we distribute the responsibilities and skills of leadership downward, like more people are going to step up and be like, I need to have, or I would like to have, equal voice and ownership and democracy basically within the workplace, which I already have some experience doing that with my tiny house community. So like, it's not a perfect business model or operating model, but it is something that distributes more power and the profit even to more people in a more equitable way.
Yeah, I think one of the dynamics of being human is that, being owing part of it. Just like, you don't need to own your own car, but you can own a network. You can be in the network, or sharing. I would use that word even more. And, I even see it with my kids. They appreciate, they treat things differently when it's part of their little world, and they can have influence on it. So I really understand your comment.
Yeah.
We've done that here in the States, right? We've created a stock appreciation rights program, because if you want people to act like owners and think like owners, they kind of need to be owners, right? Because if you expect that of somebody that isn't, or doesn't have a path to that point, you're not going to get that level of commitment, because their mind's going to be someplace else. They're going to be chasing something where they can get that. And so that's not the whole component, but it's a really meaningful one, Shane. I think, you want to be a part of something, and you want to be a part of something meaningful, right? I mean, when people come here, it's interesting, because a lot of the people that come here don't come out of the recruiting business by design, right? We don't necessarily look for those people. And one of the biggest things that we have to overcome is people say, well, I don't want to be a recruiter. I never saw myself as being a recruiter. That's not what we do. That's not what we do here. We change people's lives. I mean, we take somebody and put them in a role that's going to have an impact on generations in their family, right? It's going to have an impact on the business that they join. I mean, I go to, birthday celebrations, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs of clients that have been, along this journey, and you become really important to people if you do this job well. So, if people were coming here thinking, well, I just want to make a lot of money because I want to be a recruiter, I'm not interested in those people. I want people to come here that want to change lives, and they view this as kind of like a calling. And that's what makes this interesting, I think. If you just want to maximize W-2, go work for our competitors and be part of that noise. If you want to make a difference and you want to have fun and you want to work with really cool people, and oh, by the way, make a really good living, come knock on our door. And I think that's what businesses are going to have to do.
To add on what, yes, Mike, I believe that that you hit it on the nail there. To add on what you say, Shana, I think it's not always about economic ownership, because there's a big difference. There's a difference between economic ownership, but it's also about being, a business ownership, a process ownership. It's like, being able to drive and steer the business in a certain direction. So I like to make the distinction that I think employees can also be very happy and actualize themselves by owning a part of the business, but it does not necessarily mean, being shareholder in the company, but owing the direction in which that company is moving.
Yeah, I don't argue that at all. Autonomy is really important to a lot of people who are trying to be innovative, trying to be independent thinkers or whatever, all those great things. But I also just think that the shift in our, political environment and societally, we are shifting. And I think that, I'm really optimistic that people are going to have greater ownership over what they're involved in, or they're going to seek that out. And the companies that are going to be willing to basically distribute that or share that ownership is going to attract the people that they want to attract. And
I think some of that, you can say, has been proven a lot by technology. They usually attract pretty great talent, and at least every tech company that I work for, they incentivize you to be owner in some way, and people become loyal. I know you mentioned Apple earlier being one of the companies that I work for, and I know people that have been at Apple for well over a decade, and I don't see them leaving because they become extremely loyal to the brand. And I think part of it is you get to own a piece of it. So I can see that.
Yeah. I agree.
And I think you want that ownership, to Jako's point. You want the emotional ownership. You want the intellectual ownership. You want the financial ownership. Trust is a big part of this. We talked about that before, right? But I think, when you take all of these attributes and characteristics and you build the business model, the operating model around those constructs, bingo, but a lot of people don't do that, right? Their definition of a business model is, how does the business make money? Okay. Yeah. Got to figure that out. But absent these other things that we've talked about, it's going to run itself right off the rails. So, and I think we've seen that, many cases of that in the media. We see it all around us, where there's no inability to generate revenue, but there's a huge inability to create value for stakeholders that want to be a part of something. So you have to balance that.
Well, and that, Shane, I think is a great conclusion to our discussion, because at the end, you ended by talking about operating model, the people part of the operating model, which we didn't call it that way, but that's exactly what it was. So I would like to conclude the discussion we had today, great discussion, and also with a congratulations, Mike, because I have just received an email of, and you probably also received it, of a great win, which just came in, the one we've talked. So I've never announced a great win live, but I hope that the person in question is watching, and I want to thank her very much for trusting us in going to execute this most amazing search. So, Ro, up to you to conclude our live stream today.
Cool. So like always, thank everyone who joined us today. If you found any value, please feel free to share it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe in whichever channel you're watching. Catch you again next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.